Well, hey, you are watching the video version of the Marketing Should Be Fun podcast. It's so good to have you here. You can find this show on any of your favorite podcast platforms. There's the art, looks like that. You got Apple Podcasts, you got Spotify, you got all the rest. Anywhere you want to find it, you can check it out. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Well, welcome back to Marketing Should Be Fun. My name is Austin Savage, and I am not here with Kelsey today. I'm here with my other business partner, Mitch Nelson. Mitch, welcome to the Marketing Should Be Fun podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, super happy to be here.
It is going to be a fun one. We did one episode before with all three of us, and so it's going to be fun to kind of dive into a topic that I know that you and I do a lot of work in week after week after week. But give the people just a quick introduction of who you are, what you do for Savage Content, and kind of some of your experience with podcasts specifically, because that's what we're going to talk about today. And then we'll dive into our this or that after that.
Definitely. Yeah. So I'm a partner and a podcast director here at Savage Content. So I manage a lot of like our podcast systems, working with different people, editors, copywriters, to make sure that, podcasts are kind of coming out on time and at a really high quality. I also manage then a nonprofit that I do work with as well, our podcast, which is probably maybe even today as we record this, hitting 1 million downloads all time.
Let's go.
Which is very cool. So yeah, I've done podcasting in various forms for, the last, 5, 6, 7 years, which has been really cool.
Yeah, totally. All right. Well, we'll dive deeper into some podcast stuff today. Specifically, we want to kind of chat about some of the most common questions we hear as people are starting a podcast. But Mitch, I've got a this or that for us.
I'm only a little nervous.
And I honestly don't really know. It should be an easy one, but you and I both are coffee lovers. Mm-hmm. We enjoy a good old cup of Joe, especially a nice high quality cup of Joe. And but you also have been kind of dancing around the espresso drinks lately as well, and just some different styles of coffee. So feel free to take this question however you would like. But hot coffee or iced coffee?
I feel like I have kind of gone in and out of like maybe hot and ice seasons. I would say though, 9 times out of 10, hot coffee for sure.
Good choice.
Yeah. Is that what you would say?
That's what I would say too, for sure.
That's what I thought.
I feel like you have also cut down your coffee consumption a little bit.
I have.
Which is great. I'm sitting probably around 4 to 6 cups a day.
Wow, that's intense. Yeah, I remember, I would say I have recently maybe not been drinking as much, but when my wife was pregnant and started drinking decaf, I just like kept making the normal amount of regular caffeinated coffee and didn't.
You're like, I have to finish this.
Right. Yeah. And so then I just kind of was like, I guess I drink twice as much now.
Totally.
But yeah, so
I do the same thing on the nights that my wife works night shifts. So she'll pull like 24-hour shifts. Mm-hmm. And I always like in our coffee maker, I just fill it up to the 8 line. And so if she's there, we split it. But if she's not, I drink all 8 cups. So
yeah, hot coffee is the way to go. I love a good iced coffee, but hot coffee is that's what real coffee is to me.
Have you still been making like espresso drinks, or has that been kind of like that was just a little?
I feel like during the summer, iced coffee is obviously far more attractive, and we would do that sometimes here in the office. There's like an espresso maker. But yeah, hot coffee is just, I don't know. It's the default. It's the way that it should be.
It is the way that it should be. It's nice. I have actually gotten back to doing more pour overs. For a while, I was like coffee maker or like Keurig coffee was just like what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I have been making, at least, 2 or 3 times a week, I'm making a pour over in the Chemex, and it's been refreshing. Like
that's impressive. I haven't done a pour over in ages.
It's
unfortunate.
You should. All right, we got some stuff to get through here today. But like I mentioned before, we want to talk about just generally kind of the idea of starting a podcast and some of the most common questions that we hear. typically a lot of these I think are, pretty standard questions, and are things that we could talk about probably for a long time. But we just want to give you kind of an overview on some of these things. If you have recently started a show, or if you're considering starting a show, hopefully this is just kind of helpful in helping you kind of think through some of those things. But Mitch, I'm going to throw this first one your way, and we'll kind of chat back and forth about it. But one of the most common questions we get is, what equipment is necessary to start a podcast? And, some people are kind of deciding between like, do I need to invest a ton? Is this like, something that I can do super low budget? And there's a lot of different considerations. So where would you take that question first, Mitch?
Yeah, I think there's infinite possibilities, truly.
100%.
And you can do it low budget, like is kind of, you mentioned that. Like, I think that at the end of the day, I think really the quality of content is what's most important, like a good conversation. And I know we'll probably talk about that later. Mm-hmm. So I would just, before I get too much into things, like say, you do not need to have, a $500 microphone and a 4K camera and, all this stuff to start a podcast. You definitely do not. You can if you want. And for me, like, I get excited by that stuff. And I feel like, that's why I have that right here. But,
just look at the comparison here between your video and mine.
Right. But it's not, it's certainly not necessary. And so really what I would say is, I think if you're thinking about starting a podcast, the first question I would ask is, are we going to be doing, is this like an in-person live recording where you're sitting in the same room with somebody, or by yourself, recording in a room? Or is this something that you're recording like we are remotely, where we're in two different places over the internet recording a conversation that we're having? Because I think that kind of determines really what kind of route you want to go down. So is it going to be remote? Is it going to be in person? And if so, in person, then I think it's, is it just audio? Is it audio and video? But at the end of the day, the basics is you need a way to record audio with a microphone. That could be on your phone. That could be with a microphone you buy, a USB mic, an XLR microphone. I think we're going to list some recommended microphones in the show notes. But then you also just need, a way to record that audio. So whether it be through a platform like we're using, Riverside FM, or whether it be through something like GarageBand on your computer, if you have a Mac, or something else. That's really the basics. I know there's so much more we could touch on, but that's really kind of the first step, I would say.
Totally. I think and I don't want to get too complicated with it, but when you look at your audio, there's kind of like two lanes you could run in with it. Like there's what's called an XLR setup, which is where you're going to be spending more money essentially to maybe do some like fancier things. And then there's also going to be like a USB setup. And I think for a lot of people, as they're getting started, it's great to at least have a microphone, to not just use, your computer audio or whatever. But there are some USB microphones that you can get that are great between, $80 to $120. That will really give you like the foundation to start with. But I would also say, in-person recording is also going to be more complicated than recording through a platform like we are. I know I used to host a show called the People of Peoria podcast, and we would, bring in-person setup to local businesses and all of those things. And there was just so much more consideration about audio quality with something like that, because we were having to, think about mic bleed, where you're in the same room. So, my voice isn't just going to be isolated to my microphone, because there are 4 microphones in this room. And there were just kind of a lot of things to think through. And so for that setup, we ended up having to, spend upwards of $1,000 to, get something that we really felt like reflected the quality we wanted with the show. Whereas what we're doing currently, you and I both have decent mics, but my microphone, this one here is, a $99 microphone, and Riverside is something that we pay for, I don't know, probably $15 a month, something like that. And so it is a very kind of affordable way to to go about it and still get a solid quality kind of product?
I really think that, like, if I were to give, just kind of anybody off the street a recommendation of like starting a podcast, I would recommend just doing a remote show.
Yeah.
Regardless of kind of your proximity to your guests, I think, because of the complexity, and unless you're really kind of like technically inclined and like excited about, microphones and audio, devices and all this stuff, like it's just more than you need. So I would recommend a remote show, and I would recommend using something like Riverside because it is specifically designed for remote podcast interviews. And really the key difference between something like Riverside FM and something like Zoom, of course, like we all use Zoom in various ways now, but what it's doing on Zoom is you're on this video call on the internet, and all of your video and all of your audio is just being directly pushed to whatever, the internet, Zoom servers, and it's getting recorded that way.
Yeah.
But what is happening here is actually on both of our computers right now. Riverside is recording a local kind of like pure quality audio and video, so that the quality is really good. It doesn't matter what our internet is like. And then as we're recording, Riverside is automatically uploading that local recording to their internet. So there's kind of a step in between.
Right.
And so I know that maybe that sounds confusing, but really, if you're on Zoom and you start to talk over each other, your audio is going to sound weird and you might miss some words. If your internet is slow, your video is going to be really, kind of pixelated if you're doing a video show.
Right.
And it is just not designed for podcasting. So a tool like Riverside or Zencastr or any of these other kind of online remote podcasting softwares are definitely worth, the $10, $15 a month that they cost, because your show is just going to be so much more high quality.
Totally. It is a big difference, really, when you look at the quality of it, and is a great place to start. So it's on what we're recommending to all of our clients who do, who are kind of starting new audio shows, is to use a tool like this. Which is great. So you mentioned this too, but we will throw just a link. Buzzsprout, which we'll talk about here in a second, does have just a guide to the difference between different types of microphones and some microphones that they recommend based on price point. And so rather than kind of going through those, we'll just go ahead and link that in the description as well. So next question we often hear, Mitch, is which podcast host do you recommend? I'll just go ahead and throw that one to you as well.
Yeah. I think, first, just quickly, a podcast host, what is that? And I think, it can maybe sound complicated, but it's really pretty simple. Your audio files that you're recording need to be saved somewhere for the world to listen to, and not just saved on your computer, but, saved somewhere on the internet. And so that's what a podcast host is. It's hosting, it's, holding and hosting these files so that the whole world can always listen to them whenever, wherever. And so there are different services that are out there. We, as we just mentioned, love to recommend, and we personally use Buzzsprout, which is a really popular podcast host. In the show that I mentioned, I manage for a nonprofit. We use Libsyn. Which is, a very capable and robust tool. I would say Buzzsprout and Libsyn, these are not your only two options, but the two that maybe I'm most familiar with do the same thing, essentially. I think they kind of just maybe gear themselves to maybe just a different audience or two different feature sets that might be more attractive to somebody. I would say Libsyn. I'm pulling like relatively advanced, like kind of statistic reports based on, what countries or what podcast players are people listening to, episodes about this, that, or the other. Whereas, Buzzsprout is more like, you just reached 10,000 downloads. Like, here's how many listens your show got. Here's what we think. It's much more kind of simplified in the statistics, but I would say Buzzsprout is much more user-friendly. I would say it's much more approachable to a beginner. And I think it's a little bit cheaper depending on kind of what plan, at least compared to what we're paying on Libsyn. So there's pros and cons, but yeah, I would say that for us and for our clients, we're recommending Buzzsprout, and it's been really, really great.
Yeah. One of the big things too that a podcast host does is, also just provides a way to push your show then out to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, those kinds of things. And I do think Buzzsprout makes it even easier to like connect those things. They have like a whole list of directories, and you just click which one you want, and it'll like walk you through the process. I'm not sure how that lines up with Libsyn specifically, but that is another thing. The audio is hosted on Buzzsprout if you're using that, and then it is automatically going to push that out for you once you've gotten listed on those different things. So,
and I think just another note, like on the different features, like I would really encourage people to look into it. Like I know I really appreciate in Buzzsprout, like the dynamic ad feature. It makes it really easy to say, I want to put an advertisement, a commercial on every single episode that I'll upload in the future and I've uploaded in the past. And so with basically, 2 or 3 clicks, you can do that. And that's something that is just kind of a really kind of forward facing, like easy feature in Buzzsprout. Yeah. And there's all kinds of things like that. I know in Buzzsprout, you can make like the little audiogram sound bites, that you could post on social media. So I would really encourage people, again, there are more options than Buzzsprout and Libsyn, but look into just kind of the different features that maybe they're promoting on their homepages of their websites, and just see, is that what I want to do with my show? Am I going to have ads? Am I going to want to post audiograms? Am I going to want to, automatically post this, to my Facebook or whatever it is, and just see what's out there and what connects best with your desires for your show.
Yeah. There's all sorts of cool things. Buzzsprout gives you like a free podcast website too, if you like don't have one. Like there's a lot of great things that they do as well. So that's solid. Often I think people too, when you're getting started, there are some free tools out there, and it can be easy to kind of be like, oh yeah, let's just use like a free tool. We're just getting started. And for some people that can work great, depending on what they're looking for. But especially if you are kind of looking to build a show long term, our recommendation definitely would be to still use one of these tools that we mentioned, primarily Buzzsprout or Libsyn, whichever you decide to go with. And the base package is going to be $12 a month, and definitely is just worth it in the long run, so that you're not having to deal with having to migrate to a different host in the future or anything like that. It's just going to give you a really strong foundation to build from. So
absolutely
love it. All right. How do I create a show worth listening to?
I mean, that really is the ultimate question, isn't it?
It is. But I feel like we do hear that a lot. But what comes to mind first for you, Mitch?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe I even briefly mentioned it at the very beginning. Beyond any sort of equipment or gear or software services or whatever, those things are maybe a little necessary to have a podcast that people can listen to, on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts or wherever. But, when they're listening, you want to make sure that the content is quality, and and I'm not talking about sound quality, but high quality conversations, or making sure that you're being yourself and you're a host that people feel that they can connect with and relate with, and want to come back to hear more next week or whatever. I just think that being yourself and not being afraid to interview people that you think are going to have good things to say, even if they're not very well known, or even if they are, I just think that making a show that you would want to listen to as the host, I think is a great filter, as like a first layer of a filter to say, if I want to listen to this, there's surely other people that are going to want to listen as well. What would you add?
Yeah, I mean, 3 sort of things that come to mind, I would say is, great content does provide value of some sort. We talk about that all the time on the podcast, just as an agency overall. And value can mean like education, but it doesn't always have to necessarily mean that. It could mean entertainment. It could mean inspiration. It could mean, education or awareness, those kinds of things. And so just thinking through like, how is this show going to provide value to my listeners, and not using the podcast as a, just like way to sell your services primarily, or just like, a way to highlight what you do, but to really think about, what you are giving to the listener. I think another thing is to lean into your style as a host too. Like if you are the person hosting the show, it can sometimes feel like, oh, I have to emulate this person, whoever like that big podcast, host is that you enjoy or follow. And I think it's important to just kind of like be honest with yourself a little bit too about your personality. Like you might not be the person to be like this excited, energetic, sort of over the top host, and you don't have to be. You might be someone who is more, calming and, like, or is a little bit more like introspective, or, whatever the kind of style is that's natural to you as a host. I think it's important to not try to mask that with something else, but to just kind of lean into that as a way that you'll connect with your listeners. And you added this one, Mitch, to a list that we had put together, but to also know your audience. I mean, as you are thinking through what kind of show you are wanting to create, whether you have that audience yet or not, just thinking through like, what is it that these people are looking for? And how can I kind of meet them where they're at in that quote unquote journey? So would you add anything there?
Yeah, I think that like the cool thing is that it doesn't really matter if you, like, I think that with time, you don't need to be afraid of maybe learning more why your audience would be listening. When you start out, you might be like, I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just trying to get used to it. Like I'm just interviewing the people that say yes, to my email or whatever. Yeah. But it's like, okay, in 1 month, maybe you get some Instagram comments when you post like, I loved this show or this episode, I'd love to hear more stuff like this. Take note of that. And you can slowly kind of build up this, like database in your mind of just like, people seem to really connect when I talk this way on the show, or when I talk to this kind of person. Yeah. And I just think that with time, like it's not going to be perfect when you start, and it's not going to be perfect in 3 years when you're still going. Totally. But you can still learn, and it can still be incredibly valuable to whoever it is that's listening. And so be willing to change. You can pivot, and that's okay. But, I just think that learning what your audience wants to hear over time, I think is so important.
Yeah, I think like the time too at the beginning of a show is just such a fun time to experiment, because I mean, there's already so many different formats that a podcast can kind of take the shape of. Like it could be a solo show. It can be like, like a storytelling, like, there's all those like serial kind of like story, podcasts out there that you could, use to tell a story about, something in your industry, or there's interview shows are obviously like the most common. And, all sorts of different ways that you can share content through a podcast, that it's almost fun too, to just be like, to just try some different things and see like what feels most natural to me, what seems to connect with my audience. And, that can kind of even guide what shape your show takes in 1, 2, 3 years as well.
Absolutely.
Love it. Another big question is, how do I grow my show? Obviously, that is the other big question as people are thinking about this. And I always just want to give a caveat that like the purpose of a podcast isn't always just to be like getting more and more and more and more and more. Obviously, like you do want your audience to be growing. But I know like for it just depends on your goals and what you're trying to accomplish through the podcast, how much weight that question really needs to have in what you're deeming as success or not. Like I know for us as an agency, right, we have like this Marketing Should Be Fun show, and the listens are nowhere near like, the million downloads that that the Forgotten Initiative has, one of our clients and a podcast that you support. But that is not our goal for this show, because, we can only take on so many clients. And our goal is to really develop like a smaller sort of community that, grows naturally. And so just thinking through what your goal as a show is, I think is helpful in this question. But nevertheless, people want to know, how do I grow my show?
Totally. Of course they do. Yeah, there's some things that I think can seem like a silver bullet, maybe particularly as a show is starting, but I think they're attractive all the time. And these are not bad. That's not what I'm saying. But things like maybe swapping episodes or, doing certain types of advertising to maybe get some revenue from your show, different feed drops or like trading reviews or different things like that, that, we might all see in our Instagram feeds or wherever we are on social media of, some of the people that we follow are doing these things.
Right.
And I think those things are helpful tactics. But I think they're the most helpful only when they're genuine.
Yeah.
Whereas like there is a true relationship or friendship between your company and your friend's company. And so like we should be on each other's shows. We should post about them both together. We should encourage our audiences to review each other's. And that's real and that's genuine. But I don't know, to pay into something to do that or whatever, I wouldn't particularly recommend it. But I think really this is what I'm excited to talk about in this section is consistency is really how you grow a show. And I don't know if you want to share any sort of initial thoughts regarding consistency.
How have you seen that? So obviously you highlighted, the show that you manage. It just hit 1 million downloads. And I mean, that happened in 5 to 6 years, I believe, which is, I mean, fairly short for, you know, like what is average, I would say for podcasts. But like, how have you seen consistency specifically play into that success?
Right. Yeah. And I think just as like just kind of a note on that. Yeah. I mean, 5-6 years ago, I mean, this podcast was formed on a car ride back from a work trip where we were like, wouldn't it be cool if we like posted interviews, every week in a podcast?
Right.
And, and they're like, yeah. And, the equipment wasn't good. And if you listen to episode 1, it sounds way different.
Yeah.
Like the host is not as comfortable. The guests are not like, and so it is okay to start and for it not to be, what you want it to be in 5 years. Like there's 5 years, it is a short time to get to 1 million downloads it is a short time to get to 1 million downloads, but it's a lot, like there's a lot of life in 5 years for you to grow and develop. And, but I think that consistency is, I mean, I like to think of it in this, I don't know, maybe this won't connect with everybody, but similarly to like financial investing. The name of the game is not, timing the market where it's like, if I could just get in at the right time and get out at the right time and, do short little bursts here, like then maybe I can, get some money.
Yeah.
It is really, it's time in the market and it's getting in early and it's staying no matter what's going on through the ups and downs so that, in 30, 40 years, you would be able to get that. And it's exactly the same. I'm going to post, on a regular schedule. If my schedule doesn't allow a weekly upload, maybe it's bi-weekly, maybe it's monthly, but stick to it. Make a commitment to yourself and stick to it and then upload every month. Every month, your audience will, kind of learn that, okay, first week of the month, like I know that the Mitch Nelson show is going to come out. Right. And, I can listen to it and I can't wait.
Yeah.
And then they'll be ready for the next one. And then they'll be ready for the next one.
Yeah.
And you do that. And then, in 3 years, you have an audience that on a monthly basis is excited to listen to and share about the show that you post.
Right. I mean, that is the biggest difference that we have seen between successful shows and not successful shows. And it can often, I feel like people sometimes think like consistency is like a cop-out answer, but it isn't because, when you're looking at it, that is what kind of creates that snowball momentum effect, as you're looking at people then start to anticipate your show's release. They can get excited about it and get into a rhythm of, listening to content from you.
Yeah.
And that makes a difference in how often they will listen and, how then they will tell people about the show and how they can communicate, on your behalf to other people who might be interested. And it just is very, very helpful. I think often we will see people who have the intention of starting a show and keeping to a certain rhythm, but they bit off more than they could chew, maybe weren't honest with themselves about the rhythm that they could keep up with, and instead start posting sporadically, where obviously posting something is better than not posting at all. So, if that happens for a season, that is absolutely fine. And, you can be kind to yourself about that. But, if you can get into a rhythm where it's like, hey, every other Tuesday, we're sharing a podcast, and, we're going to stick with that. We're going to create a system to help us, achieve that week after week. It's just going to be a lot better than, posting on a Tuesday, then not posting again for a month and then posting the next week. And people just don't get into that rhythm of how to kind of engage with your content. And some of it is more likely to get missed in the long run.
Yeah, I think you mentioned creating a system that can help you kind of stay consistent, kind of on the back end, not just consistently posting, but, all the work that is required to get to the posting part is so important too. Like, I think being honest with yourself, like we said, is weekly too much? I mean, weeks just keep coming,
they do.
It's it's next Tuesday. It's next Tuesday. So it's like, is weekly too much? Like, I don't know. For reference, this show that we're talking about with the Forgotten Initiative that I manage, I mean, we were bi-weekly for 5 years. It wasn't until January 2023 that we decided, let's go weekly.
Totally.
Because we didn't really know if we had, the systems and the staffing, or if we could get the guests, or if we could do all this stuff to go weekly. And so being honest with yourself, but then creating the system, and that can be as complicated or as complex or as simple as you want it to be.
Right.
Like, is it a calendar reminder that you just set, every week on, Wednesday, I need to record for the following Tuesday, or whatever it is. Or is it, signing up for a free account with something like Asana or Trello, and putting together a little, board of tasks that you're just going to copy and paste, every week.
Right.
Just so that you don't have to think about it in a new way every week. I mean, that's exhausting.
Totally.
That's not sustainable. And so creating that system creates that consistency, which grows your show.
Yeah. I love it. We literally could dive into so many more questions about podcast stuff. And I feel like I have, a bunch of thoughts that kept popping in my head, but I hope that that's helpful, because I think that, there are a lot of questions, when it comes to launching a podcast, and more than anything, both of us want to communicate that it is very possible for you to launch a show. And, we dived into, some of the more complex things, some of the more simple things about starting a show. But, just to highlight too, at the very beginning, that you can start for a very low cost. And, it doesn't have to be this, fancy kind of endeavor. Really, if you have a desire and a passion to build a community with a certain group of people, starting a podcast is a really powerful way to engage those people and provide them value to really kind of build your brand in the long run. And if you need support or want to chat through, any more of that, we would love to talk with you about your show idea as well. You can, learn more about our agency at savagecontent.co. And there's just a little bit, that highlights some of our podcast process as well. But even if you're just wanting to brainstorm your show, we'd love to do that with you. So, Mitch, any final thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think you really hit the nail on the head. You can start a podcast. You don't have to be a tech wizard or whatever. It can be as easy as you would like it to be. And I think that is really, really cool.
Yeah, it is. All right. Well, thank you for joining me today, Mitch. And to all of our listeners, thank you for listening. And we will see you right back here on the next episode of Marketing Should Be Fun.